10 seconds. We are now live, everyone.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us at this meeting to provide information about a potential resident curatorship at White Gardens. My name is Kristen Bratt, Deputy Public Information Officer for the Park Authority, and my job this evening is to facilitate our presentation and discussion. We are very pleased that you join us. Tonight is an opportunity for you to become familiar with our program and this property, and for us to hear from you regarding any questions or concerns you have. We are here today to carry out this process in a virtual format. The state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this meeting to occur as a physical assembly, and as such, we will conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated meeting platform, and the public may access this meeting through the designated link provided. This meeting is being recorded and will be available online later this week. Before I turn the meeting over, I'd like to first introduce the meeting participants. The Resident Curator Program Evaluation Team members include Stephanie Langton, Resident Curator Program Manager for the Park Authority, David Bukta, Heritage Conservation Branch Chief for the Park Authority, Mary O'Lean, Operations Branch Manager for the Park Authority, Michelle Meadows, Senior Right-of-Way for the Park Authority Planning and Development Division, and Robert Beach of Robert E. Beach Architects and the Fairfax County History Commission. Also joining us this evening are Laura Grape, Resource Management Division Director for the Park Authority, and Judy Zatzik, Manager of Greenspring Gardens. And of course, we want to welcome our applicant, Meg Stout. Let's begin by getting familiar with our property and the Resident Curator Program. And for that, I will turn the meeting over to Stephanie Langton.
Thank you, Kristen. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Hannah, are you able to pull up the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us all tonight and for your interest in the White Gardens property and the potential curatorship of the White Gardens house through the curator program. As Ms. Bratt said, my name is Stephanie Langton and I oversee the resident curator program. And we've prepared just a brief PowerPoint discussion tonight to share with you. So we will start with an overview and background on the resident curator program. Then we will focus on the White Gardens property, its mission, and recent projects undertaken at the property towards that mission. And finally, before we hear from the applicant, we'll discuss on how the resident curator program fits and aligns with the park's mission and the park's use. So let's dive right in. Slide, please. The purpose of the resident curator program is to preserve and put back to use publicly owned historic properties that are vacant or underutilized and needing significant repairs and improvements. This type of program allows a locality to enter into long-term lease agreements with qualified tenants with no rent fee collected in exchange for the curator's financial commitment to rehabilitate and maintain the property to a set of preservation standards and with reasonable public access, as we'll discuss. So in 2014, Fairfax County became the first locality in Virginia to adopt a resident curator program. And the program was adopted in accordance with the Virginia General Assembly legislation from 2011, which enables localities to adopt such programs. And the legislation has a few basic requirements for the program. First off, state law requires that the property be historic. So in Fairfax County, in the resident curator program ordinance, the property must be listed or eligible for listing on the Fairfax County inventory of historic sites. Second, all the work must be done in accordance with established treatment standards for historic properties. So all of the work within the Fairfax County Curator Program is done in accordance with the federal standards administered through the National Park Service, known as the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. And then thirdly, the program requires reasonable public access that is consistent with the historic nature and use of the property. So this typically occurs in the form of annual open house events. So these are the basic components of the program. Slide, please. So let's take a look at what the application process and the curator selection process looks like and highlight where we are in the process now. So back in the fall, we posted an invitation to submit applications online along with the application package. And we notified stakeholders on our email distribution list through press releases, real estate listings, website updates, social media accounts, and applications were accepted over a period of 60 calendar days. So following the deadline of the application period, resident curator program staff carried out an administrative review. We do this to make sure applications are complete. And once we make sure we have all the materials that we need for review, we forward the application along to financial review, and that's conducted in the County Department of Finance. So the applications that pass financial review go on to the evaluation team, which is where we are in the process now. So the evaluation team is comprised of relevant Park Authority and county staff with involvement and knowledge on the park and the property in question. And ultimately, the evaluation team scores the applications based on an established criteria, which we'll review. But first, there is a 30-day public comment period. During which there's also a public hearing, which is occurring this evening, where the applicant will share their proposal to the evaluation team and public for questions and comments. So following the comment period, the team will convene an open meeting to score the applications. Slide, please. So the applications are scored on the following criteria. The first is proposed reuse of the property. Is it compatible with the Park Authority's mission, with the general management plan for the park? Is it compatible with the surrounding neighborhood? Next, we look at the scope and nature of the public benefit, public access. As I mentioned earlier, they incorporate services and access that offer a benefit to the public? We also, of course, look at the rehabilitation plan that the applicant provides. Each property has what's called a historic structure report and treatment plan in the resident curator program. And this is a document that's done by a third-party consultant who comes in and assesses the condition of the property and really puts together an itemized list of required improvements with cost estimates. And this forms the basis of the curator's work plan. So the applicants have an opportunity to outline their timeline, their milestones, benchmarks. We do ask that the work is completed within the first 5 years of the lease. So this is an opportunity for the applicant to share, who's doing the work, curator or contractor, if there are any cost estimate adjustments, that sort of thing. We also look at experience and qualifications. What is the curator's experience reusing, rehabbing, maintaining a historic property? Are there any specialized skills in historic preservation projects? We look at the overall presentation and organization of the application and the presentation. Does the applicant meet the goals and guidelines of our application package in a clear and well-organized manner? And finally, of course, public response. What is the public's reaction to the proposal? So the evaluation team will score each application, and if the curator is selected, we'll share that with the Park Authority Board, at which point the Park Authority Board and Board of Supervisors leasing process will begin. So now let's turn our attention to the White Gardens property and how the program applies there. Slide, please. So the John C. and Margaret K. White Horticultural Park has a master plan from 2006 that enumerates the goals and objectives of the park. So it's primarily a horticultural park meant to preserve and enhance the horticultural resources, ensuring that sensitive resources are appropriately maintained and preserved, promoting stewardship opportunities, educational opportunities, interpretive opportunities, all to produce a quality passive user experience. So this is a resource-based park, and I'd like to briefly touch on the resources of cultural and historical significance that we'll be discussing tonight. Slide, please. So the resources we're discussing include the house, which is designed by architect Joe Lappish and completed in 1939. Notable original character defining features do remain in the house: the interior U-shaped staircase, original crown moldings, chair rail, fireplace frame. Exteriors includes the decorative kind of segmented brick arches over the windows. And of course, there's a beautiful enclosed porch, which was added in the 1950s. We're also considering the circa 1876 bank barn, which is really the sole surviving building that attests to the agricultural history of the property. So these are the structures for consideration in the program. And then, of course, we need to mention the other kind of primary resources in the park. The Whites were horticultural enthusiasts starting cultivating their garden in the late 1940s. And really over the rest of the 20th century, their plantings grew to the collection existing today. So the property offers a legacy to be preserved. And towards that end, a significant amount of work has already been accomplished and ongoing today with both the house and the grounds. Slide, please. So we'll take a look over the next couple of slides at what's been done in the grounds and the house. For the landscape, archaeology was carried out on both the meadow and non-meadow area of the park. Meadow restoration occurred in 2017, which entailed the restoration of the existing field to a native plant-dominated grassland, including the management of non-native invasive species. Improvements were made to the entrance drive with the installation of stone on the upper level driveway. Horticultural restoration is currently underway. There was an inventory of the collection that was conducted, plans and designs, and now they're into implementation. Next slide, please. And with regards to the house, as I mentioned earlier, a historic structure report and treatment plan was written. Mold remediation was carried out, which significantly improved the interior condition of the interior condition of the house, with wallpaper removal, remediation work, and then some painting. Most recently, there have been HVAC upgrades and replacements, and by the end of the calendar year 2022, wood window repairs will be undertaken as well. Next slide, please. So finally, let's take a look at the resident curator program's role in preserving and enhancing the legacy of the park's resources and supporting the mission of the park, and what a curatorship would look like at the park. So the use of the house will remain residential. The curator parking spots will be limited to a maximum of 2 designated spaces in an area that will not interfere with the existing current use or traffic. Especially as it relates to volunteer work days and horticultural projects. Those will continue uninterrupted, as will use of the trails. I do want to call out 2 areas to outline sort of the program's expectations of the curator as it relates to the barn and to the horticultural collection. Curators are not expected to contribute or participate to an improvement in activities related to these. But if the curator is interested, or the applicant is interested in use of the barn, which we will see in the presentation this evening, a minimum amount of improvements will be required for its use. And its use will continue to be shared with, horticultural groups, with specifics kind of discussed during this evaluation process. Same with the horticultural collection. If the applicant would want to be involved, we'd certainly consider proposals, but primarily the curator in the curator program focuses on the structures, the house and the barn. So before we hear from the applicant, I would like to call your attention to our next steps and public comment opportunities. Of course, there's opportunities to speak this evening. Slide, please. Next slide. Perfect. So additional meetings of the evaluation team will be held. The first would be Wednesday, April 6th at 10 a.m. if needed. And the second, Wednesday, April 20th at 10 a.m. And for more information on how to join to listen via computer or phone, we have information on our resident curator program website, and the link will be in the next slide. While these meetings are open to the public, there will be no opportunity for public comment at them. Members of the public are asked to submit comments in writing to parkmail at fairfaxcounty.gov by Wednesday, April 13th. And with that, I want to thank you for your time this evening, and I will turn over the meeting to Ms. Bratt.
Thank you, Stephanie. Just a reminder that we will take comments at the conclusion of both presentations. So Hannah, if you would please pull up the next presentation. Now we'll hear from our applicant, Meg Stout.
All right, next slide. Good evening, I'm Meg Stout. I represent the family that is proposing to become resident curators of the White Gardens property. Next slide is talking about the program, because I hadn't seen Stephanie's slides before I finalized mine. And I do feel that White Gardens represents one of those houses that hasn't recently been used, that is in danger of falling into disrepair, the house and the barn also. So next slide. This is a picture of White Gardens as it was in 2002. You see the greenhouse there. It looks in wonderful repair. This is during the lifetime of Margaret White. I've got an outline of what I'll be covering. And without anything more, I'd like to kind of go into the history of this property, going way back. So next slide. In the, I think the early 1600s, the King of England gave a grant to Lord Fairfax for 5 million acres between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, that was just fading to a picture of 2022 and what the house looks like now. It was looking a bit sad, I forgot about that. So 1660 actually. And then in 1685 next, William Fitzhugh secured a grant to 22,000 acres up near the Potomac. That's that teal kind of triangle shape that you see there. The green rectangle just represents the map that you'll see in the next few slides. And if you hit it one more time, we'll see the pin that shows the northeast corner, which is the location of the White Gardens property. Yeah. So next slide. William Fitzhugh took his northern neck parcel and he named it after the name the Vikings gave the town where his people had been the rulers, Hothenfoth, or as the English called it next, Ravensworth. When William passed, he divided this particular parcel between his two sons next. And the top half went to William Fitzhugh, who was able to pass it in its entirety to his son, Henry. It wasn't until the fourth generation then, next, that we see the property start getting significantly divided. Henry had 5 sons, and they didn't really like how it was. Next, after some trading and bartering and selling, the northeast corner that we're focused on was owned by Mordecai Cook Fitzhugh. When he died, it was divided between his 8 kids and his widow. And when his widow, Frances Fitzhugh, passed a few years later, next, she left the northeast corner to her teenage grandson, James Mason. He was 14, and his other great-grandfather was George Mason of fame, George Mason University, George Mason. It was during James Mason's ownership of the property that that bank barn was built that is still on the White Gardens site. But James sold the property a year before his marriage next. And it was still being used as a farm up until 1935. Next. The car happened. And that introduced a social mobility that nothing prior had accomplished. But Northern Virginia remained farmland for quite a while. It was next the construction of Key Bridge that really started opening Northern Virginia as a bedroom community. And relative to this particular property, next, it was the construction of Memorial Bridge that really started changing the economics. I'm sure the Depression also made it advantageous for farmers to consider liquidating their farmland into parcels that people were willing to buy. Next, in 1935 is when the farm was sold off. And it was only 3 years after that, next, when the whites purchased the parcels and began assembling what is now the 13.5 acre site that we have today. Next slide, I'm just going to show this in context. Next, there's a red rectangle, and if we next blow that up, you can see where White Gardens is located below the intersection between Annandale Road and Route 50. And next, we'll blow up that purple rectangle, and you can see the White Gardens site in that residential neighborhood between Sleepy Hollow Road to the east, Annandale Road to the west, and just below Kearns Road. So next slide, talking about the White family, how did they come to decide to do this? Next, in 1926, JC and Margaret met at the Brookings Institute when it was still a college type of organization. JC was studying tax policy in preparation to become a tax attorney, and Margaret was probably studying economics, given that her dad had been a banker. Next, once JC passed the bar, a few months later, he and Margaret married. Next, they set up housekeeping in the Lombardi apartments on Pennsylvania Avenue, just walking distance from his law firm. And there they welcomed Margaret Beverly. Because Virginia was an option, they moved to Beverly Hills, which is nestled between Arlington and Alexandria, where the yellow 2 is on the map. And if you click one more time, we'll see the route that JC would have taken to get to his job in that first year, up Glebe Road to Lee Highway and then across Key Bridge, because there was no other way to get across the river. Cars made all this possible, but toddlers don't know that cars are dangerous. That summer, there was a terrible accident, and next, Margaret Beverly was killed. I think this definitely contributed to the White family passion for assembling a rural environment for the rest of their children to grow up. As we mentioned, they bought the property in 1938, and then next they moved to the Falls Church location in 1939. And one more click and we'll see JC's new commute into the office. It was actually shorter, even though he's much further away as the crow flies. Next, this is a plot of what the property looked like when they first bought the property. There was a farmhouse from the 1800s, or actually early 1900s, I think, up on the hill. The bank barn was almost directly south, and there was a chicken coop and a shed. And there's remnants of the old roads from the 1800s that would zigzag through the farmland. Next. So that was the house, not a fit house for an up and coming lawyer and his family. Next is a south view of the bank barn. Because it's on a hill, you could just have the livestock go straight in from the bottom, but you could have a vehicle drive in from the top to deal with hay. That gable would allow a wagon to come through and get loaded up with hay or offload property and goods that they'd gotten. It's a very useful barn design. Next, we'll see, this is now looking from the north at the barn. So you're seeing the upper side the uphill side of the barn. And in the side, you can see the house. They moved the house down the hill next to the barn. And the last one, click, is the brick home that was built. I'm not sure if there's documentation about Joe Lapish's reasons for his particular design, but side by side, you can see how much the south-facing gable on the brick home looks like the south-facing gable on the historic barn on the site. It's really striking. Next, now we see a plot of what everything looked like over the decades as the Whites continued to improve the property. Two things I wanted to point out. One is, you note that now the driveway is circular. And I suspect that that was so that JC would never have to back his car up around his family anymore. The other thing I wanted to point out is the 1956 glass porch addition. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see what that looks like. It's an amazing mid-century modern design. It looks very much like the original design of the Sleepy Hollow Elementary School, which was built in 1953, just a stone's throw away. Next, we see a picture of the Whites entertaining. They had all the benefit of being able to see their wonderful grounds without actually having to be out in nature. And of course, as we've already talked about, from the late 40s, they spent a lot of their time and effort cultivating the azaleas and rhododendrons and camellias and boxwoods and other plants. And also an amazing screen of trees around the perimeter so that they really didn't have to, you had the illusion that you weren't close to other suburban neighbors. Next slide. This is the camellia house that JC built next to the old farmhouse, between the old farmhouse and the barn, and he would overwinter his camellias there. Next shows the later edition of the greenhouse. Next slide. It says, it's too big, I don't want to move. This is the greenhouse that they then built right off of the kitchen so that they could expand even further their ability to propagate and otherwise refine the horticultural assets of their property. Next slide. This is just, for those who haven't been at this site, a couple of views of the amazing pastoral landscape. It's shocking almost for somebody who grew up in this area to realize that this is right there south of Route 50 and Annandale Road. Next is showing the barn as it was in 2002. I think it was Hurricane Isabel, though, came through and did a lot of damage. It destroyed the old farmhouse and the camellia house, I believe. And so next, if you click, you'll see what the barn looks like today. I think that's maybe the same slide that was in Stephanie's presentation. Next. So how did White Gardens come to be acquired by Fairfax County? Well, JC had died in the late 70s when property values for the average house in Fairfax County was still less than 100,000. By the time Margaret, by the time of the late 1990s, the average home price in Fairfax County was $250,000. And she was being pressured to sell. I think it was like $2 or $3 million they were offering. She would have seen how Walnut Hill, just 4 miles down Annandale Road, had been carved up into tiny little lots of only 1/10 of an acre apiece. So she knew if she sold it for development, they would bulldoze all her gardens and contour it and just destroy everything that she and her husband and her family had loved so much. Next, the other thing she knew as the wife of a tax attorney is that when she died, and she was, I believe, in her early 90s at this point, she knew that anything more than $650,000 would be taxed at the rate of 60%. So most of that money would just go straight to Uncle Sam. And if she didn't sell before she died, her family would have to sell in order to pay the death taxes. So worrying about this with neighbors, and neighbors suggested, hey, maybe Fairfax County might be interested in acquiring this property. And so next, Margaret and Fairfax County came to an arrangement. I believe the price was $600,000. And next, part of the deal was that Margaret would remain as manager and resident for the rest of her life. And so she was, whether physically present or just spiritually present, she was kind of leading the charge until 2010 when she passed at the good old age of 100 and almost 104. Next slide. So Fairfax County next indicates that this is a resource-based park, as we've talked about the amazing horticultural resources that are here. Next, the use is to be for stewardship, public interpretation, education, and enjoyment. Next, looking through the analysis, well, one, the rule is thou shalt not impact the horticultural resources themselves. Next, the indication is that it would be the immediate neighborhood and nearby zip codes who would mainly be visiting the park. And I think there's one more bullet. Just the indication that small scale programs and special events could also enhance visitors' experiences. It didn't have to just be a passive enjoyment. Next. This is, I think, an early 2000s view. The green are the woodlands around the property. In yellow and pink, we have the upper and lower gardens. The white is that amazing 3-acre meadow to the east of the house. The house, of course, is in the brown in the center there. And down in the gray, you have the barn and the quote unquote utilitarian area, which shows where the old farmhouse was located. And in very, very faint type, if you've got really good eyes, you can see where they were thinking a 25-car parking garage could be installed. And I think by that time, if you look at the gray in the middle, so I've seen it, so I can tell that at the end of that driveway, it says parking, but it basically looks like a fuzzy gray rectangle. And the structure that was indicated, this would have been from before Hurricane Isabel caused all the damage. There were structures there. Those structures are not there anymore. Next slide. So glad the barn survived. Stephanie's already talked about the great work that's been done in restoring the meadow and getting rid of the invasive plants. Next slide. So I wanted to find out what the public might be thinking about this. And I came across different posts expressing some anger that there aren't the trails, benches, and interpretive signage that had been envisioned in the master plan. Next, other comments were from neighbors complaining that because there isn't on-park parking, people would be parking in their streets in order to get access to the park. And in particular, next, there was a comment from Margaret's oldest son who expressed some dismay about, as far as he could tell, most of the money that had been secured for the park was being spent on studies and structures as opposed to the horticultural resources that were Margaret's passion. Next. So I think this slide may be duplicative of what Stephanie had. Let's click. I just wanted to say, of course, Fairfax County doesn't want to remove the house. Any of us who've dealt with things like this know that costs money. It's not free to remove a house. And at least as assessed by that third party, the house had a replacement value of over $1 million. Having a resident there also prevents or at least deters people from using the property for inappropriate purposes. And it's just something about living in a thing. It prevents a certain level of decay. And as I became aware at the earlier hearing, the terms are the lease could be up to 30 years, but not more than 30 years. And that's in exchange for rehabilitating the property. Next slide. And this is partly for the comments on the internet that didn't understand what this deal is about. Next slide. So the third-party evaluator assessed the fair market rental value of a house like this in this area to be about $36,000 a year, $3,000 a month. But Fairfax County doesn't want to maintain the house. Next, so they're saying, resident curator, please maintain this place and we'll give you credit for the averaged out 1% of the replacement value that is typically considered the right amount of maintenance. Some years it won't be that much, but there'll be the year when we have to replace the slate roof. Next slide, or next. And then being a government agency, of course, they would like property taxes to be paid. And they're not going to pay them. And so since the resident curator would be expected to pay that, that would be knocked off of quote unquote the rent. So next, the adjusted market rental value comes out at about $14,000 a year. And the way they calculate the benefit is next, you say how many years of lease at that many dollars per year. And that comes out to the amount of rehabilitation restoration value that they're expecting the resident curator to kick in. So for a 30-year lease, it would be $430,000 worth of improvements to the house. Next slide. Oh, this was just, again, for people who, because most people I run into have no idea how this makes any sense. And if you click one more, just because the details, most people don't want to pay attention to that many details. But effectively, if you use the country's averages for inflation and appreciation of real estate and such, the net cost of being a resident curator is comparable to the net cost of having a mortgage for 30 years at 4.5%. All the other details back and forth. In any case, it's much better than renting, where they can just racket up the rent anytime they feel like. Next. So the house next is about $270,000 worth of restoration that is required to bring it back to snuff. Next, the barn is about $60,000. Next, that doesn't add up to $430,000. So next, we're proposing about $100,000 of other things. $30,000 is high for a greenhouse, but I didn't want to short that one. And then other improvements, which had been proposed to be more, but then they said, oh, the lease can't go more than 30 years. Next. So the proposal itself that's posted on the internet has the 18 pages of itemized line item things that need to happen. And each one is identified with the year in which it's going to happen. At a large level, the first year would be about getting the house habitable and safe, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And if the trees need to be dealt with, doing the tree work. If the barn foundation, for example, really needs to be stabilized rather than waiting, that would need to happen in the first year. The second year is restoring the historic character of the home. And we're proposing to put together a multimedia offering for the house. The third year would be finishing off any house tasks, installing the greenhouse, and installing the multimedia that we're talking about. The fourth year would be restoring the barn and finalizing any plans for the rest of the benefit. And then the fifth year would be finishing everything off. So if you click, we'll remove. We went through all the line items, and we think that we can do about a third of this ourselves. I'll just note, since I've mentioned the multimedia, the hours to put together the multimedia, we're not counting that as part of our sweat equity. That's just because we love history and stuff. And it just seems like it would be such a nice thing for people to be able to come in with their smartphones and click a QR code and go, wow, I didn't know that. Next slide. So the additional improvements that we had proposed were next, the greenhouse, dealing with the trees if they need to be dealt with, and some kind of building, because it would be so nice to have accessible restrooms and some kind of food prep area if people want to have events at the site. And we've toured the house. There is no way you can make the bathrooms in that house accessible. During the earlier hearing, it was clarified that parking is really desired. And just in case that didn't end up adding up to 100,000 once we were all done, there is some work that could be done on the trails next. And so looking at a reordered prioritization next, first we would deal with anything that needs to be done with the trees. The 10,000 is looking at how large the trees near the house are. If there's a lot of branches that had fallen onto the porch roof, and we were looking at them, I think, in November. So maybe they're not dead, but just if they were, it could be up to 10,000 to take care of that. And that's a safety issue. So that would have to be first. Second, we would prioritize installing parking. I was really pleased to see in the I was really pleased to see in the plan that non-hardtop permeable types of parking were being actively considered, because that's what we would be interested in doing. More expensive, but so cool. Third, we would focus on restoring that greenhouse so that the character of the house itself is restored to what it was during Margaret's lifetime. Next, we would take down figuring out, knowing what the rest of our budget is, we could find out how much could we do on a structure that had an accessible bathroom at the very least, and what more. So that next we'll show a 4 next to building. And again, if there were any need for any more, we could work on some pathways to fulfill the full 430,000 value of the offering there. Next is just about us. So next, our families lived in the footprint of the Ravensworth land grant for decades. If you look at the 4 of us and add our years separately, it comes up to 111 years. Next, we would really like to get my daughter and her husband back to Fairfax County. They really miss Fairfax County, and I really miss my grandkids. I'm sure my husband does too. Next, we'd be very interested in helping to participate in small scale programs and special events to raise awareness of the White Gardens facility. Next, my interest is mainly conservation. I bring writing skill, screenwriting, video production, those kind of skills, and I'm an engineer in my career. My husband is a game designer. He has voice acting chops, and he's interested in astronomy, which shows up in the activities. Next, my daughter Tara is very interested in the fiber arts. She's done practical demonstrations, I think, as far south as North Carolina and maybe as far north as Pennsylvania. She was a docent at Sully Plantation when she was here in Fairfax County. And so she'll do everything from washing the wool and retting the flax to creating it into beautiful things. My son-in-law, David Phillips, was pursuing graduate studies and looking at interpretive program development. I believe things like you see at the Frontier Culture Museum in Staunton, Virginia, and other living history museums were the kind of thing he wanted to do. And they had thought they would have to do it in Central Virginia because it never occurred to them they could possibly do anything like that in Fairfax County. Next slide. So I think that using Parktakes to advertise the programs once everything's in a state to have programs would be good. One, we could limit the attendance to whatever size is appropriate, given the state of any parking or what else. And the other beautiful thing about using Parktakes is this would make people aware of White Gardens, where right now, I think there's largely ignorance. Even the maps don't show it as a park. And so this is what was in our proposals. Some of those would possibly not be okay because of food safety, particularly the barbecue and pig roast. But these are the kinds of things that we are interested in and would be able and happy to host and facilitate. And with that, I probably went over my 15 minutes because of all the nexts. But real quick, on the multimedia guides and tours, if you click, I think 3 times, just some examples of the kinds of tours that we're thinking of that we could help put together for folks. Certainly any scripts and products would be submitted for approval before we started production, and then again before we were to release anything. And with that, the get off the stage slide, this is a picture of our family at taking wedding pictures for the wedding of my youngest daughter over at Greenspan's. And we look forward to helping make White Gardens a similarly valued resource for the county. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meg. Next, we are going to give our evaluation team the chance to ask questions. Now we'll take questions from the evaluators.
I was on mute. Can you hear me?
We can.
Stephanie Langton here. I'll start, and perhaps I need to defer to other members of the evaluation team and their background and knowledge on the park as a whole and sort of its needs and vision. But can you speak, Meg, a little more on the proposed new construction? What would the approximate footprint of that new building be with the facilities, approximate location, what level of maintenance would the curator provide, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. So when I originally put in the proposal, as you recall, I was thinking of a structure that would kind of spiritually replicate the old farmhouse, and kind of both the fact that there had been another house on the property and the socio-economic having servants on site thing. And that would have given us the restrooms, modern kitchen, and interpretive space. But given the need to prioritize parking, I don't think that's feasible. And I think it may have been Mary, but somebody had mentioned that the old house site is no longer, quote, part of the utilitarian area. That part of the property has apparently now been put under cultivation. So that part is no longer available. My revised vision of what this would be is something styled in the style of the Camellia House, except facing north, because you don't want solar gain coming into accessible bathrooms. I would hope we could get a couple of bathrooms in there. I would hope that maybe we could do composting restrooms. That was something that was envisioned in one of the plans that I read for the site. Maybe a little bit of an outdoor kitchen, again, thinking of the ways that people might want to use the property for events. And so I could see this being, I would imagine it would be close to the parking, because if you've got accessible bathrooms, you'd want it close to wherever the accessible parking spaces are. And so kind of due south, give or take, of the barn. So the parkings would be between the barn and wherever the structure is going to end up. I would love to see it. I imagine it would have to have water brought in, but it seems like the electricity could be provided by solar. And there should be minimal maintenance. That is something that, while we're resident curators, that we would certainly be interested in keeping it maintained. And we don't anticipate there'll be heavy use of the park. But when you think you have to get to your car and drive to CVS to go to the bathroom, that's really going to cut down on the number of people who are actually going to want to use the park.
Thank you.
Tiffany, I have a question for Meg Stout. Is that how did she determine her prices for the greenhouse portion?
So I've been very involved in the aquaponics community, and greenhouses are a big thing with aquaponics. Looking at the historic pictures of that kind of Gothic cathedral arch type of greenhouse, if I knew I could just buy a kit, I could get that part of it for under $10,000. but I'm not sure that the footprint is exactly the same as what I could get off the internet with a kit. So if it has to be custom built because of the dimensions of the brick foundation and the doors and all of this, just knowing a substantial greenhouse that somebody's using for a little micro farm for aquaponics or hydroponics can definitely go upwards of 100,000. So I think we definitely should be able to bring this in at 30,000, but I know that that can go high. So I hope to be able to save a lot of money there when everything's said and done. But I think I became aware of this opportunity about a week before the application period closed. So my time to do a whole lot of research into the details was not what I would have wanted over.
So I think it might have been a Lord and Burnham greenhouse that was attached there that had glass glazing. And so so that would be something interesting as part of your research to look into Lord and Burnham greenhouses. And I don't know if they're all glass now or if they offer any Lexan opportunities.
Yeah, I would be interested to know what damage happened that caused the older greenhouse to go away. But there's things like double glazing and other things like that that are modern. So there's doing it completely historic, but there's a reason that greenhouse isn't there anymore. So we wouldn't want to be entirely true to historic if that just means we're going to have to replace it every 10 or 15 years. I don't know why it failed.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from our evaluation team?
I have one more, if that's okay. Meg, I really do appreciate the breakdown of tasks and milestones by year and in the application package. And it's great to see, each required task of the work plan with an estimated year of completion and the ratio you provided tonight of proposed sweat equity versus contractor work. Can you touch on some of the tasks that you would be carrying out with the house that the curators would be tackling?
So it's easier to talk about the things where I said, I'm not volunteering to do that. So anything that was dealing with, oh golly, what is that acronym for the cement blocks? Or French drain work or mortar work or the electrical work or plumbing work, anything where you need to have inspectors come in and make sure it's completely up to code. We were like, I wouldn't want to volunteer that those are things we would have gotten skilled at until we actually did get skilled at them. And I don't know if we're going to get skilled at doing mortar work. So there were things like, I think there was a $500 item for wiping off the light fixtures with a moist towel. That's definitely in our wheelhouse. We definitely could do that one. There were things like a lot of the kitchen, just appliance, replacing those things. We're handy enough that there's some of that we could do. And over a 30-year period, a lot of that is stuff that would wear out and need to be replaced anyway. So it's kind of nice if we know how it got put in and what got put in, as opposed to signing up to always have to have that be completely contractor provided. I could certainly provide, I have it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I could definitely share that back in your direction that could be posted on the internet as an addendum work plan. And on some of them, I was like, I thought we could do part of it. We'd definitely be wanting to have a qualified contractor making sure we were doing it right. So occasionally it's not 100% sweat equity or contractor.
Gotcha.
Another thing that I would ask, since I did have so little time between becoming aware of the opportunity and us submitting those 5 pages of proposal, was I don't know if the county has a recommended list of vendors that they know the level of detail that is required. That would be very much appreciated.
Mhm. Typically, the program, we don't provide a list like that for, conflict of interest kind of reasons. It's the curator, it's on the onus of the curator to identify.
Okay. Well, I work for the government. I'm very familiar with getting 3 bids, so we can do that.
Do we have any other questions from our evaluation team? Going once. And twice. Great. Well, seeing no other questions, we are now going to open up to questions and comments from the public. So if you would like to call in and voice your questions or comments out loud, you may dial 602-333-0032 and enter conference code 411406. That is also in the chat as well. We will go down the list of callers and ask one at a time if the caller would like to speak. You may also ask questions in the comment box to the right or underneath the video. If you do not see the comment box, please refresh your page. And we do have some comments already, so I'm going to start with those. The first one is, will the property be open to the public for walks as Green Spring Gardens Park is, as was discussed when the property was purchased?
Certainly our intent is that it would not be closed at all based on us being there, other than the immediate environs of the house. And our intent is, with getting the parking installed and working on the interpretive products, to make the ability to passively just enjoy the park even better than it is now. I don't know that we're going to get it up to the same standard as Green Springs Parks, because that's a much larger park and there's a whole lot more involved. It's kind of up to Fairfax County. I kind of love there's that display of townhome backyard things that they have there. I don't know if that's something that would be an appropriate installation in part of that utilitarian part of the park. But anyway, I look forward to being educated what can and cannot be done.
Well, I'd like to add too, can you all hear me? Am I on mute? That unlike some of our other curator sites where we're able to provide more land within the curator lease, the leased property at White Gardens would be a much smaller boundary around the house. And, so use of the park would continue, without interference.
Next question is more of a comment. Wonderful presentation. I'm really excited to know all the work that will be done in just 5 years. The next question or comment is, prior to Miss White's death, I attended many public hearings and we were told this park would not be a place for public events that would include food or restrooms. This was in order to maintain the horticultural aspect of the property. I am very concerned about the proposed option to add public restrooms and parking. Thank you for that comment. Is there any response from our applicant or the team?
I may have to defer to a member of the evaluation team with more knowledge on the park as a whole and its needs.
I would say, just from having studied the documents that were prepared during Margaret's lifetime, she was talking about possible modifications that could be made to the house so that there could be accessible bathroom facilities in the house. for the public. And the master plan lays out that 25 space parking lot south of the barn, which was part of the utilitarian area. So this would not be taking away from the currently cultivated area. Yeah, I've toured the house, so I know that the kitchen in the house is like tiny house tiny. So if it's prohibited to have any kind of food prep area, that's fine. But I do think the master plan definitely, and this was during her lifetime, definitely laid out plans for accessible bathrooms. So I'm confused because the documented situation talked about accessible bathrooms.
Mary?
Yes, Meg is correct. The master plan does have an area designated for approximately 25 parking spaces. And so there was a lot of discussion about how much access to permit there and how much to restrict. And I think it was originally conceived that the house would be open for the public, but as Meg has said, that you would basically destroy the interior of the house if you tried to add the ADA accessible restrooms. So once that was determined, that particular aspect of the project was no longer viable. So then how the property then further becomes available to the public and useful to the public, that remains to be seen. But indeed, parking for about 25 cars was included in the plan that was adopted approximately 2005.
Moving on, we have a comment. I live on Horseman Lane and I don't want it used as an access road to the property. Thank you for that note. Bob, and I apologize if I don't say this, Heilferty says White Gardens is an ecological gem. Is there any plan by the county to engage with volunteer groups to work on the gardens and invasives? He continues that the bird life at White Gardens, particularly during migration, is very rich. The county should consider highlighting this aspect of the park to gain further public support. Mary?
Yes, prior to COVID, Green Spring Gardens was hosting fairly regular volunteer work days. That has fallen off with the new manager, with the change in management. And the new manager is looking at what are the next steps for the White Gardens. That yes, all of us are very concerned about the explosion of the invasive vines there. But I think that people who visit the park on a regular basis will be pleased with the additional horticulture plantings that have been installed over the past month or two to expand the native plants, particularly the native azaleas, as well as some spring ephemerals and some other native perennial plants in the what I call the lower garden area, as well as some things in the upper garden area.
Thank you. And now I think we're going to go to the phone lines. Our web team can help me go through the phone lines to see if we have anybody who wishes to speak.
Sure. The number ending in 8722. If you would like to speak, please let us know. 8722, you're now unmuted. Okay, moving on. The phone number ending in 5956. If you would like to speak, please let us know. The number ending in 8722. If you would like to speak, please let us know.
So if you are listening on the phones, you're probably going to need to mute the public input, the page that on your video, so that we don't hear that feedback. There is a delay between.
Okay, moving on. The phone number ending in 5956. Would like to speak? Let us know. The number ending in 722. Okay, moving on. The phone number ending in 2801. If you'd like to speak, please let us know.
Hannah, that is actually the phone bridge. So you can skip
Oh.
to.
Perfect. Okay, so then the last one is 2366.
Hello. Yes, Andrew Bartlett. I live right next to the park. And just a couple of questions, if I can. I'm sorry if I missed this with the first question or comment that was in the chat feature while I was switching over from the video to the phone line. But what, if any, impact does this agreement and this lease agreement, the terms of this lease, have with my ability to use the park, as I'm a pretty regular person who uses that as a part of my weekly walks, my daily walks with my dog?
I'll take that. The boundary around the house that will be under the curator lease would be smaller, would be closer to the house. And so any park use, there would be no interference.
Okay, and is that restricted area going to be in any way specifically identified?
With signage, you mean?
Some sort of signage or some sort of fence or rope or anything? To
be determined.
Okay.
At our other sites,
And
there aren't any.
Okay, perfectly understood. And then, in addition, I know that there was discussion about projects pertaining to other portions of the property, and so things like the barn. What, if any, restrictions to being around the barn would there be as a part of this lease agreement?
Well, as part of lease negotiations, the specifics of the use of the barn would be, outlined and detailed. Certainly, we've recognized from the first meeting and this meeting that there's interest in use by the applicant, and also it needs to remain shared with horticultural groups and volunteers who've stored tools there and that sort of thing.
Okay, but in terms of public access to, say, bring a blanket and put it out in the meadow or near the barn in the warmer months, this lease agreement won't in any way impact that?
No.
I could say the only reason it would impact is if there needs to be, like, there's, I want to say, a 1 or 2 inch crack in the foundation facing north in the northeast corner. When things like that are being repaired, and there'll be a limited construction boundary just for safety, but that would just be for the duration of the work. Similarly, for the envisioned, we'll have to see what the details of the parking are based on whatever the current thinking is. How many parking spaces? Is it the kind of parking where it's those plastic thingamajiggies where it still looks like grass? Or that's what I would love to do, but I don't know how you demarcate so that people don't drive off that parking into the actual grass. So as we come through those details, the nature of that parking construction, it will be blocked off at least for the time when it would be dangerous to be immediately there. But understanding that certainly would want to localize any blockage so that we are minimizing the negative impact on folks such as yourself who want to enjoy the rest of the 13 and a half acres. Over.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then my final question, and sorry for so many. We just really love the space and love what it is, and really hope to see it just improved from here on out, is with regards to the programming that's currently planned. And I'll admit I'm not as familiar with what I'm assuming is the queuing system. You mentioned Parktakes or something like that, but what, if any, restriction are you putting on the size of events? Just looking down through your proposal and then what was provided, there seem to be some of the events that would be more popular than others.
Yeah. So I think the one that might be actually the largest is the proposal that there be a May event for the Rhododendron Society. They very much miss being able to come to that property and do those things. But the rest of the events through Parktakes, at least, I'm envisioning something like, for example, I've seen in Parktakes where they're like, we're going to take 10 people to Falling Water, and there'll be a bus trip and it'll be this much and you reserve. So I'm envisioning a similar thing where people can only participate if they have reserved and paid a nominal fee, whatever that fee is. So it's not open season for everybody to just show up.
Okay.
So just so that that caller knows, is that Parktakes is the program magazine that the Park Authority produces on a quarterly basis. And it's how we advertise the programs that are offered at all of the parks, not just at White Gardens.
Thank you so much for that and the additional information about the Parktakes as a way to learn more about this. I really look forward to learning more about the curator and the program and what's being proposed as a resident, as I mentioned, park adjacent. So very, very interested in some of that programming and how we can participate as it becomes available. So thank you.
Thank you, caller. Our tech team, do we have anyone else on the line that wishes to speak? Or I think we've gone through everyone at this point. Okay, I'm going to switch back over to our comments and our chat. We have a question. How do you plan to minimize the impact of the parking on surrounding neighbors? Will more trees be planted and taller fences installed? Anyone with a response to that?
I think we would have to wait until a parking plan was proposed and evaluate that. I don't think any more than just a concept of where the parking area was proposed in the master plan.
So I don't see any more comments in our chat, and I don't see anyone on the line that hasn't been given an opportunity to speak. But we are on a 30-second delay with the streamed version, so we'll give folks a few more seconds here. And in the meantime, I just wanted to give a little more information. The application will be available to review on the Resident Curator Program website. You can also submit comments in writing to parkmal@fairfaxcounty.gov. Comments will be accepted until April 13th. Additional virtual meetings of the evaluation team will be held on April 6th if needed, and again on April 20th. These are open to the public, but do not offer a chance for public comment. For more information on how to join via phone or computer for these meetings, please visit the Resident Curator Program website as the meeting dates approach. I don't see any more comments in our chat and any more callers on the line. So at this point, I will thank everyone for joining us this evening, and we look forward to